I think we grew up with all the wrong Disney princesses, and we're taught that basically your life begins when you get picked, even though we no longer need some random dude on Hinge to
Mhm.
approve of us to survive. We feel like we need it.
Anna Kai, welcome to After Curfew.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Everyone who does not know Anna, she is a content creator. She blew up for her Get Ready With Me, where she talks about relationships, dating tips, all that fun stuff. So one of my favorite topics is the Chads. Girl, can you give us a definition of what is a Chad?
A Chad is whoever, you know what? Here's the other thing too, is like a Chad can be a woman, because for my girlies who date
Ooh.
girls, they're female Chads too. So my guess, a Chad is an asshole in any way, shape, or form it comes in, you know? So that's kind of how I define it. Not all Chads are a Chad. I do feel very badly for the Chads that are like the good Chads. I've had a few followers reach out to me and be like, I'm Chad, and I'm not that kind of
No.
Chad. I'm sorry.
Like,
I
I'm
just
not as bad as you're making it out to be.
I mean, I didn't mean to weaponize the name, honestly. I just needed a name that a generic name when I was first starting out on social media. I was like, oh, it gets too exhausting to say my ex-boyfriend or the guy that I used to date or my ex situationship. So I just thought I would humanize the stories with a name, and I wanted to be generic. I'm not trying to call anybody out from my past because, there are reform Chads out there, and, so some of them may have gone on to become non-Chads, but that's how it started. And now it's just become a thing, and it's just easy. People get it. You immediately know what I mean when I say, don't be a Chad.
I know. See, I've heard Brad, but then when I was watching your videos, I'm like, Chad? Yeah. Like Chad, Brad, fuckboys, the Dusty Crusties, they're all the same.
Yes.
So how do you not date a Chad? What would be your go-to steps?
I think the telltale sign of a Chad, or just any man that you should not spend your time on, is a guy who doesn't know how to ask questions about you. So I've been on plenty of dates where the conversation is very one-sided. And I think women in general are, because we tend to be more empaths, more empathetic. And I think women are socialized to ask questions and know how to interact with somebody and how to be interested in somebody else. Whereas I don't know if straight men are always taught those skills. I think a lot of guys are just taught focus on yourself, focus on your career. It's all about you. And then they take that into the dating sphere, and they don't know how to bounce the conversation back. And so I think that's a red flag. But honestly,
Definitely.
It's very few of us go through dating in our 20s and 30s and maybe beyond without dating a few Chads. Sometimes you just don't know. But just,
I think, don't
date
Chads
a
are
self-involved
helpful.
man.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny when you say they don't ask the questions. I've been on so many first dates where I am I'm asking all the right questions and they're not asking anything back. And it's okay, well, that date was fun because I'm fun and you were actually awful.
We've all been on them where it's the guy texts after and he's like, that was so great. And you're just exhausted because you're I just ran a fucking marathon for 2 hours. Because I was trying to, and I've been in so many situations like that where I'm like, why didn't I just end the date? Why? Because I wanted to be liked, even though I knew half an hour into the date, I did not like you. And I didn't want, I didn't care what drinks you were buying me or whatever was on the table. I was I do not like you, but I want you to like me. And I will continue to be the most entertaining person you've been on a date with. And so they're wow, that was a great date. And you're gasping for air, reaching for that oxygen mask that falls from a plane afterwards. So, I think that's the thing. And then it's wait, why do we do this to ourselves? It's so okay to be disliked by men you do not like.
Right. I think that's one of the biggest things, especially in my early 20s, I would be putting on the show of a lifetime. I need you to like me. I want the Oscar at the end of this performance.
I think we've been taught that our value lies in who wants us and who likes us, our generation. And I think maybe if you're younger, you were spared some of this. Millennials were the last of the Mohicans to really be taught really traditional female values. I think we grew up with all the wrong Disney princesses, and we're taught that basically your life begins when you get picked, whether
Mm,
it's by a group of girls. It doesn't always have to be boys, you know, in
right.
school. They're like girls, like, you know, the popular girls that you want to be friends with, and then the popular girls get the popular guys. And I think that becomes so ingrained in us that when we leave those cliques and those social like ideas of our hometowns, we bring it with us into our 20s, even though we no longer need some random dude on Hinge to
Mhm.
approve of us to survive. We feel like we need it.
Also, when you don't get the validation, you almost seek it out even more. Like, there's been so many times where I've been in a situation, I'm like, I know this isn't my person. I know this is not right for me. I know this is toxic and ugly. But for whatever fucking reason, I'm strapping myself in and I am going hard in the paint. It is something I think we all do. Like, when we don't feel accepted, we go harder for that thing. When there's somebody over here that's like, hey, I like you, I want to accept you. We're always like, nah, fuck that. Like, we want to go to this.
We all do it to varying degrees, right? Like, I think I've really gotten out of that habit out of years of therapy and just like introspection and realizing I'm just much happier being disliked by some people than being liked by everybody. I dealt a lot with bullying and not feeling like I fit in when I was growing up. I grew up in a very homogenous area outside of Philadelphia. Diversity and inclusion was like not a thing when
Yeah.
I was a kid. And so I always felt like the odd woman out, the odd girl out, and I was always seeking approval from
Mm.
everyone. You know, I didn't have friends up until I was like a sophomore in high school. I wasn't really liked by boys. And I think when I finally got those things and I was finally accepted, I was like, this feels so good. I never want to be not accepted again. And so something in my brain was like, being accepted by other people at any cost to myself is worth it because of how good it makes me feel. You know,
Mhm.
imagine being rejected by everybody for your entire childhood and then finally being accepted by a group of people. And, you know, boys, I had boyfriends towards like the end of high school, and I was like, this is great. You know, I don't go to school feeling like I don't belong. And so there's like this huge sense of belonging for me that I brought into my 20s. And even though from a friend perspective, I wasn't trying to fit in with girls like the mean girls or anything like that anymore. I found great friends in college that I'm still friends with now that are just genuinely like my friends.
Mhm.
I think it's so much harder actually to let go of our learned behaviors that we should really unlearn when it comes to dating. There's something about dating that brings out just like the primal trauma, all that shit. Dating men who made it hard for me to be with them and to love them felt natural to me because I'd spent my whole life trying to make connections. I'd spent my whole life trying to find friends, trying to find a boyfriend, and so to me it was like the guy who was like in the corner. You know, I talk about this a good amount on my own channels, but like I had a great boyfriend like senior year of high school who
Mhm.
was like awesome, who like really cared about me, was like super secure in himself, and like I left him for like the fuck boy because I
Okay,
just
it's a canon event. It is a fucking canon event.
Well, I always remember that because I was like, that started it for me because I went through a series of behaviors like that throughout my 20s. It's like I feel like you end up dating and breaking up with the same guy over and over again until you finally learn the fucking lesson.
You're just dating the same person just in different fonts. And you
Yes.
just have to keep doing
Ooh,
it until you
yes.
graduate. It's just like this toxic cycle of like bringing up your darkest shit. You just keep relearning those lessons in your 20s where
Yeah.
it's like until you can finally figure it out, you don't get to the other side. You don't get to the beautiful relationships, but which you are in now, right? You're
Yes,
married.
I am married, and it's so funny. I talk about so much about my past and the heartbreak of my 20s, but I actually have been with my husband for 6 years. So it's actually been a while since I've been in the dating game, but it was so scarring to me that I'm like, ooh, does feel like it was just yesterday. And I went
Yeah.
through so much of it in such a condensed period of time. Like for 10 years, I just dated like a mad woman, like on average, so much more, I feel like, than most normal people. I started off in
Mhm.
my early 20s dating every single person that I could possibly find that like didn't look like they were going to, you know, hurt me like physically
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something. and so it was like, I was just like, I don't know what I want. So I'm going to date every single guy to figure out what I want. And then once I got to my later 20s, it was like, to, I really realized I don't need to give men a second date if I really didn't feel it on the first date, just because they were like a nice guy.
Mm,
And I think that's
okay.
the biggest lesson for me but I wouldn't have gotten there if I didn't date all of the nice guys that weren't my person in my early 20s. So I do think dating takes practice. Look, are there people that go on one date from an app and that's their husband? Yes, I'm friends with a couple of those girls. I was like, oh my gosh, I talk to these girls all the time. I'm like, I can't believe you went on one Tinder date, because Tinder was like the first dating app. It was before like it was, considered a hookup app or whatever. It
Right.
was like Tinder was the only dating app in 2012, 2013 when we were
Hmm.
graduating college. And all of a sudden, like, you and I are like, how the hell do we meet guys outside of college? It's really important to protect your peace, but there's such a delicate balance because there's so many people who I think take themselves out of the game because they just can't stand the game itself. And I always tell people, like, you don't have to enjoy dating in order to do it. Like, there's this idea that like we need to enjoy every single thing we do and to make, I think it's a very like this generation thing and a millennial thing where it's like you have to, it's like toxic positivity, right? I'm like, you have to enjoy like dating and you have to make the most out of every date and you have to learn from and you know what? No, you can just let it suck. And
Right.
like our parents, I think, know that. Like our parents are like, yeah, a lot of shit we did sucked, from our careers to dating, whatever. We didn't have that many options, so we dated the guy that lived down the street. You can let stuff suck and still do it because it's a means to an end, and that's kind of how I thought. Sometimes it was easier for me in my 20s to date. Other times I was like, I really don't like this, but I'm going to go out and do it.
Yeah.
And there's no need to put a positive spin and a bow on it.
That is so true. Like we always try to find like
Just hate it and go,
the
here's the thing.
silver
I was
lining. And it's like sometimes people just fucking suck. The relationship, the situation sucked, and let's move on. Move
not
on.
everything in life needs to be this massive learning moment and like this
Mm.
thing that like is just great in the end. Some things are just meant to suck.
Do you feel like there's a lesson though, like within those shit moments? Because I
That you
will
can
say, like, there are a few relationships where I'm like, that was fucking awful. Never want to go through that again. Didn't learn anything. But then, like, a few months later, I'm like, I'm healed. I learned some shit.
from every relationship I've learned something because I've
Yeah.
been with the person long enough to like glean something from it, even if it was a really toxic situation. I'm more so talking about the
Mhm.
act of dating and like the
Okay.
drudgery of going on all these like first, second, third dates that kind of lead to nowhere. That I think it's like, you know what, if you're going through that and you can't even get to the relationship phase, because I think that's where a lot of women are. They're like, I can't even find somebody to be in a toxic relationship with, or any relationship, be it toxic or healthy.
Mhm.
And so I think a lot of people are in this phase where they're like, I'm just dating and I can't even find somebody to go on a fourth date with, or
Mhm.
let alone like 4 months or 4 years or anything. And so I think from that situation, all you can say to yourself is like, sometimes like I can get through hard things. That's the lesson that it's teaching you, that you can do the mundane and the monotonous stuff that comprises most of our lives and a lot of our jobs. I always think about dating as a career. And it was my second career for sure when I was in my
Yeah.
20s. I spent just as much time on it as I did failing in my actual career, but always trying. And,
Yeah.
it's just a lot of stuff in our lives are not glamorous and they're not fun, but we do them because eventually it will lead to something glamorous and
Right.
fun.
Just going into it, like, I have to do this. It's part of the work. Like, let's
Yes.
clock in, let's clock out, and we'll like reassess. That's a great way to look at it because you're not putting so much attachment. Like, so many people, like a first date, like, oh my God, it went so well. Like, it's like we plan all these like Delulu thoughts in our heads, and it's like, just look at it as being a little more detached.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying like be detached on the date. I'm just saying like don't have, don't place like the weight of expectation on a situation because, for example, on the first date with my husband, and I joke to him about this all the time. I'm like, I almost canceled because I was just so tired that day. I was coming off of a
Yeah.
cold. I was like kind of sick still because it was like pre-COVID. So it was like acceptable to go on a date with like a slight cold,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, it was on a Thursday night, so I'd spent all day. It was a really busy day at work. And I was like, I really do not fucking want to go on this date. I just want to like sit and talk to nobody. But it's lame to cancel same day. So I went, and the moment I saw him, I was like, oh, I feel great. I was like, this is great. You know, yes, for sure. So it's like, that's what I mean is it's just like, you just really never freaking know, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even after that, I knew it was a great first date, but I was like, I've had great first dates before that like led to nothing. So like, let's just see how it goes.
A hot take of mine is if the date went too fucking well on the first date, I just like don't trust it. I think we get like so it's like the love bombing kind of vibe where I'm like, oh my
Yes.
God, this is so exciting. Like they're gonna do this and we're gonna do that and we're planning all these things. It's like some of the most like bland dates where I'm like, that was good, but nothing to like write home about. Those are probably some of the best like relationships are like they linger to like a third, fourth, fifth date.
Here's a great red flag.
Ooh, tell me
For
the red flags. Tell me
because it reminded me when you said this, you were like, oh, the love bomb, because I had one particular love bombing experience that just scarred the shit out of me. What a good red flag is if the guy that you're with is like making too many grand plans for a second or third date. Like that's kind of an indication that they're not rooted in the present. My husband, Dave, never made me wonder. I was never confused with him. I always knew he was interested in me, but he was coming at it from a very level-headed perspective. He wasn't like day one, like, oh my God, you should meet my mom. Like, oh my God, like we need to go to this place for vacation or whatever. And I think those are the men who, you know, maybe even unbeknownst to themselves, I want to give some men the benefit of the doubt and say like they have not gone to enough therapy to really even understand what they're doing. It's not always coming from a place of just intentional malintent, but those are the men that, you know, just really don't know how to slow down and not, you know, not build up the moment to something more than what it is. And I think that's the thing is it's just like, you don't want to date a love bomber more so because it might not even be their fault, but what they're in love with is the idea of you. And then at some point, the reality of who you are hits them and they realize like they're no longer in love with that. And it's not your fault. And maybe it is a little bit of their fault, but it's just like find a man who wants to get to know you in the present moment. And that's, you know, what we were talking about, a guy who's genuinely interested in asking questions and not just how you make him feel. I think a lot of love bombers love bomb because at the end of the day, it's about them. It comes from a place of insecurity. So it's like
100%.
she makes me feel great. She looks like this. She, you know, having her on my arm is going to appear like this to the general public. And it never, there's not two people in a relationship, in a love bombing relationship. There's one.
Yeah, exactly. It's what you're doing to that person. You're like filling some type of void. And once that is like, you know, diminished, it's like, oh, actually, I don't really think I like you. I don't really see you as my wife. I don't really see this trip to Cabo going through. Like I've had breakups of like year plus relationships and then situationships. And those, I had one situationship that love bombed me.
Always the situationship that hurts way more.
Like
loss
it's like
of hope.
Like you pause the movie halfway through and then like you're not able to finish it. And I think that for me took me a long time to understand where I'm like, I thought it was going to play out this way. And now I have no idea. And my perfectionist, like, I'm like, I need to know. I need to put that into a file cabinet and close it. And I wasn't able to.
I think what happens is that in a 2-year relationship, you got to live out the story and see that the story is not a fairy tale. And in a love bombing situation, mine in particular, that was like extra scarring, was 6 weeks. You do not get to live out the story. And so your mind is still living the fairy tale and like your body is very much in the reality of the fact that the fairy tale has ended. And so you never had a chance to discover that you probably didn't like this guy, or, you know, maybe you liked him, but you realized you were incompatible. It's the loss of hope. You're not just mourning the loss of a relationship. You're mourning the loss of like what it could have been. And that's more devastating, I think. And I think that's why it's more devastating than a long-term relationship ending, because you kind of, in a long-term relationship, at that point, you're like, I've exhausted every option. And like, there's no more wondering what if. I think what if is like one of the worst questions you could ask yourself as a woman in a relationship.
It will rattle your brain and bring you fucking
No.
anxiety, the what
It's like
ifs.
whether you're asking yourself whether I should go back to a man that you were in a long-term relationship with because maybe he's different now,
Mm-hmm.
or, you know, what if this love bombing situationship could have been a real relationship? It's like the right guy's not going to make you ask that question ever.
Yeah. One of your videos, this is like, it sparked what I wanted to talk about next, was the 20 things that you learn in your 20s. One of the things that you said was if you have to ask yourself if you're in the right relationship, you're probably in the wrong one. And that kind of goes with the love bombing, where we are kind of convincing ourselves in real time. And like we're telling other people, like, oh, it's great. But like those gut feelings that we have, especially like the female intuition.
You know, when they say, like, when people lie, they almost lie with too many details. Like, if they're lying to you, it's like criminals on, like, I watch so much Dateline and so many
Oh,
murder
same.
mysteries
Yeah.
of, like, you know, serial killers who,
Mhm.
like, they're like, you know, I wasn't there and here's what I was doing. And they were like, literally, I took 2 steps, you know, to the car that night and I like did a left. It's like too many details, right? There's too much
Yeah.
exposition. And I think a telltale sign for yourself is that if you are doing too much explaining to your friends, family, to yourself of why you should stay in the relationship, it's probably not the right one because it's a lie. It's like, you know, when it's a lie in a murder case because they just are trying to make it sound like the truth with
Hmm.
all these extraneous details. And if you're trying to justify it to yourself, you're trying to make a lie the truth with all these unnecessary details of why he's great when he could be. He could, it doesn't mean he's a bad guy. It's just not the right
Right.
relationship. And
Yeah.
I just know that, like, truly, like with Dave, I didn't ask anybody for advice. I wasn't like, is it not? It's
Hmm.
not like we were perfect, you know, it's not like we never fought or whatever, but I was just like, we're going to figure it out together versus me running to my girlfriends when we have a problem.
The constant debriefing is so
Yeah.
unhealthy. And that took me entering like a super healthy relationship that I'm in right now. Like, I don't go to my friends. I don't have to because there's no like questions or like, I don't need to like talk things through. We do the craziest shit when we like think that somebody is right for us and we start to really believe it. And it's just like absolutely insane once you start to get into like a healthier, more fulfilling relationship.
Oh, it's
But
absurd how much, but it's like, you know, we gaslight ourselves. I think
all the
that's the
time,
honest truth. It's like,
constantly.
you know, we talk about men gaslighting us, but at the end of the day, like nobody can do to you what you don't give them permission to do to you, right?
And that's a hard pill to
So,
swallow, yeah.
yeah, and so it's like, you know, you give them permission to make you believe something. And it
Mhm.
is one of those things that, like, you don't realize until you're out of it and in a healthy relationship. You're like, why did I waste all that time? You know?
Yeah.
But that's what women do. That's what we've been taught since the dawn of all time. And I think it's changing with these younger generations. I can't even believe I'm saying that because in my
I
head
know,
I'm
like, you make me sound
still,
so old.
I know,
But
I'm like,
yeah,
in my
yeah.
head I'm still like a 19, but no, I'm 33. There's now straight up like one or two generations below me that like are starting to date. And
Mhm.
I think women have been taught like we need to fit into a man's life, and that's what we try to do.
Yeah.
And men aren't taught that. So when things don't work out with men, like if they don't feel like, hey, it's like you're a great girl or whatever. I've had so many exes who have had no problem leaving me
Mm.
because they were just like, you're not right for me and I'm gone. They're because they don't think not having a partner is like a testament to their value as a human. I think
Right.
women see being single as, or women have been taught to be to seeing being single as
Mhm.
a detriment to their value as a human. It's like, I think, you know, and obviously, I don't know when this episode is going to air, but the whole Harrison Butker
Girl,
speech
we
took.
yes, I wanted to talk to you about that.
Okay.
Shook. I know the episode will probably come out a little delayed, but I'm like,
No, we
let's
can
dive
talk.
into
Yeah,
that
let's
bit.
go back to that. I think it's interesting because he has a wife clearly who I've read interviews because I was very interested, I think, as most people were, about his wife and his mom, like after that speech came out. And, um, you know, I'm not going to say I feel bad for her because she knows who she married. And so if she's
Mhm.
happy, like more power to you, right? Whatever.
Right.
But she had basically said that she was not raised particularly religious. She met Harrison in high school. They
Mm-hmm.
dated throughout high school and stayed together in college. And he was becoming more and more religious throughout college. Like, it sounds like he found Catholicism as he went through Georgia Tech. And like by his senior year, like she was like, he never forced me to convert to Catholicism. He just prayed for me like every day. And I was like, okay, well, no, he didn't like tell you, like, hold a gun to your head, forcing you to Catholicism. But like, that's a very
Manipulative.
it's very
Definitely.
manipulative.
Yeah.
It's like, to be with me, like, this is who I am. And like, she was so young when she met him,
Was
and it's
she
like,
younger than him?
no, they were the same
You
age,
were the
but they
same
were
age.
both so
Okay, okay. I was
young. And
like,
so it's like, I think about myself at that age and how I would have just twisted myself into a pretzel if my high school or college boyfriend wanted me to
oh,
do it. Like, I understand converting, wanting to, because I wanted to convert to my college boyfriend's religion in order to stay with him. I was fully ready to do that. And my college boyfriend was Jewish, and he still is
mm.
Jewish because he's still alive. But Judaism is very difficult to convert to.
Mhm.
I think Catholicism is a little bit simpler in that you pretty much decide and you can go become christened. Whereas Judaism, I was told by my then boyfriend that you have to get rejected several times by the rabbi before you're truly accepted, because they want to make sure, you really believe, which is fair. You should not be
Yeah.
converting to a religion because you want to stay with a man. He didn't outwardly say to her, you need to convert to Catholicism. But if you're praying over somebody every day, and, that is in and of itself persuasion, coercion, whatever you want to call it. And then she was like, then I converted, and he broke down crying and said, I've been secretly praying every day for you to convert. And it just seems like, that she met him too early, or maybe she's like there are women who don't want to make their own decisions. And I hate to say that, but it's like,
Mhm.
it's true, because it's like, and I think we are very insulated on the coast, like you in California, I'm in like that New York area, where like we are
Right.
surrounded by a very different like culture. There needs to
Yeah.
be space for dialogue for, women who do not grow up on either coast and are not taught that working is the end all be all and everything. And,
Mhm.
I don't have any qualms against women being stay at home moms. But I think the thing is, like, women should feel like they're not forced to do that in order to stay with a man. And I don't know where that line is, because in his speech, he basically said, like, I have the career I have because my wife doesn't have one, and gave up her ambitions, and, now is living her true vocation as a wife and a mother. And I'm like, who
Mhm.
are you to say what her true vocation is? But that's the thing, is that, like, that speech was permitted
Mhm.
because there are lots of people who believe that. And I'm not actually that surprised that something like that came out, because there's plenty of people who think like that.
Right.
This one happened to go viral, but there are lots of men who think that a woman's place should still be in the home.
Yeah.
And those are not my people. But then there are women who think that a woman's place should still be in the home. The whole trad wives movement on TikTok, it's really eerie to me. But like,
No.
the trad wives movement is like, it stands for traditional wives. They like dress like if they're like old school, like 60s, 70s, like housewives. And they're just like really
Oh,
traditional
okay.
wives. And they're like all into like, my husband gets home at 5:05, and like by 5:05 in 10 seconds, I have his favorite like bourbon and like a coffee cake that I
No,
like
it's like that what's
made
that
from,
horror movie, that Olivia Wilde made? You know what I'm talking
Don't
about?
Worry, Darling. Don't Worry, Darling.
It's giving me that. That was
Loved that
such a good
movie.
movie, I know, right?
It's
So
and
good.
that and Stepford Wives and all of that. It's giving that. Yes.
Yes, yes, yes. No.
And like, I'm not gonna lie. On days that I just have a really fucking tough time with my career, and it's like people are just annoying, and I'm just like, oh my God, like working is such a pain. I
Mm-hmm.
look at that movie and I'm like, I want to be a robot. Just
Like,
make me a robot and just put me to sleep. I don't have to deal with it. I
yeah.
think what I'm trying to say is, I'm like, what is the point of this rant here? What I'm trying to say is, I understand the allure of not having to make your own decisions, not
Mm-hmm.
having to make a living, not having to stand on your own 2 feet financially. I do understand that. And I understand that that has been an option given to women because for so long that was the only
It
option.
was, yeah.
But I don't think we're in a position anymore where we can say that that is the smart choice, because I have seen so many of my parents' friends and people in, couples in their 50s and 60s and people who write to me who say, I gave up my career to raise a family, support my husband, and now he's divorcing me. We're in our 60s. Guess what? His pockets weren't as deep as I thought they were. I've got to go back to work now out of being out of work for and it's like, it's just stuff like that where the woman is at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Always, if she didn't have her own career. And that's why I always advocate for women having their own careers.
Especially like in your 20s, you're like, oh, that sounds great. Like a man paying for everything. Like, oh, he's going to get me a bag. And it's like, it's almost like not like a way directly like, oh my God, this guy is trapping you. But like you are kind of being trapped. Like you do need to have your own career. You do need to have your own funds. Like never rely on anybody else. Like that is one of the biggest lessons. Like my parents, they're divorced. Like that was their situation. But you really have to be smart if you want to take that route. But going back to Harrison,
Butker, I know.
like whatever, like that man, I was just so shook. But I'm like, I need to talk about this with you because I was just so taken back by that speech. And ugh.
I know women personally too
Mm-hmm.
that the allure of not having to make your own decisions and be taken care of for the rest of your life is greater than any allure of freedom or having a career or independence, because it's tiring. Like being
Huh?
a working, if you've ever seen Ali Wong, she does a really great like bit on this
I
where she's
love
like,
her.
she's great. And she has this bit where she's like, honestly, feminism screwed us over. Like,
Yeah, you're like too many
I want to go
dramas.
to fucking lunch and like go get my nails done in the middle of the Tuesday. And instead I've been on like 5 flights and like working is hard. Okay.
Yeah,
And if
yeah.
we're lucky, like you and I are, we get to do what we love so that it's not hard every minute. But there's
Mm-hmm.
still stuff that, even as much as I love this career, there's still stuff that there are days where I'm like, I really don't want to freaking upload a video right now,
Right, right.
But the payoff is so great that I think we can't afford not to do it in some capacity, because I think, again, it's like everything comes at a price. And so if
Mm-hmm.
you are willing to pay the price of a little like freedom and financial freedom and your independence, then that's fine. But you have to
Yeah,
understand the risks. And if you're lucky, by the way, which some women are, you don't marry an asshole and he does
yeah.
take care of you. Okay. And that happens. It's not like, okay, you become a housewife and you hitch your wagon to a guy and he's automatically going to cheat on you and take all your money and everything.
Mhm.
But sometimes a lot of women don't get so lucky and you don't know who you marry until many years down the line sometimes. So if you don't have your escape fund, where do you go?
Love bombing doesn't have an expiration date. Like I know
Oh
people
no.
that have been love bombed for
Yes.
years. Like, and then it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
fuck, like you wake up and you're like, well, that is not how I wanted it to go, but you got to figure it out. And it's just, yeah, you really do have to stand on your own 2 feet.
And I think the reason why that mentality exists and why Harrison Butker got a standing ovation, including from some women, is because there's still a large percentage of women that think by supporting the patriarchy, they will be protected.
Mm, yeah.
And they don't
Yeah.
realize that it's so much better to protect yourself than wait for a man to protect you. Every situation can exist, and it can exist in a healthy way,
Mm-hmm.
but only if it's a mutual decision. And like,
Yes.
certainly, I mean, I don't even know what it's like in the Butker household right now, but if I was his wife, I'd be
Not good vibes. I'll
embarrassed.
tell you that. I
I'd
wouldn't be
be
happy.
embarrassed as hell. Like, you know what? Like, dude, you could have just lived that life and thought all those things instead of like becoming the most memeable man of this like week.
Okay. So going back to the 20 things I learned in my 20s video, The know how to give yourself closure, even if he didn't, especially in this dating in this dating era, situationships, like what would be your best tips to find closure when something ends abruptly?
I've had so many men end things and just be like, it's not you, it's me, or like maybe
Oh,
later we can, like they try to come
yeah.
back. And the best way to give yourself closure is that he didn't love me or he didn't love me enough. And like, I think once you really let that sink in, you can accept that it wasn't meant to work out. Because if you keep telling yourself, well, maybe this, or maybe he loved me, but it wasn't the right time, then you leave the door open. You know, I always remember like I was getting dumped by an ex, but he was really, you know, what he was trying to say was that he really liked me, but he wanted to date other people to see if I was it. Okay. Yeah,
This is
fine.
not The Bachelor, sir. We don't get to just date 20 women. The fuck?
I know. So, you know, I had met him right after he'd broken up with his fiance, and I think he felt like it was too soon to jump into a relationship. I was like, why couldn't you have told me that like 9 months ago when I told you what I wanted? I was
9
very
months? Oh my
clear.
God. Yeah.
Yeah, it was rough. I was like interesting. And he was like, oh, but like, can you leave the door open for me? Like leave the screen door open. You don't have to leave the door completely open, but like maybe the screen door. And
Are
I
those
was
his exact
like,
words? Is that what he said?
I can't remember
Like,
if it was his exact words or maybe
oh my
I
God.
said, it sounds like something I would say, honestly, because I'm all into analogies and
Like,
metaphors. I
so
might have said,
poetic. Don't
I,
leave the door open, but the screen. Yeah, like, okay.
I'm leaving the screen door. Like
Yeah.
I was like, or maybe I said I'll close the screen. Who the fuck knows? It was one mesh door that was being left open, but I was trying to say I'm closing another door, half open,
Yeah.
half closed. The point is, you shouldn't just shut the door. You should get somebody to like brick that door up. I mean, just no, just cut it out. All right. Because like,
Yeah.
just again, it's not worth, unless you are both so young. Like I give a pass to people who are like, we met in high school or college and we broke up
Mhm.
right after. And then we found each other in our late 20s, 30s again. Like that's different because nobody fucking knows what they want at 19, 20.
No.
And you know, some people do. I shouldn't say nobody, but a lot
I
of
know,
us don't.
but
You know what I
most
mean?
cases, it's
Because I'm
just
like,
yeah.
now that I say that, I can think of people I know who like met in middle school and are like still married today. And I'm like,
That is,
interesting.
yeah,
I know. I'm
insane.
like props to them, but like that's like
Right.
the exception, not the rule. Most of us need time to figure out who we're not before we figure out who we are.
Ooh. Yeah.
So, in terms of giving yourself closure, you really have to talk to yourself and tell yourself that he did not like you, he didn't love you. Like it's almost like
Mm,
you got to talk yourself down from that pedestal while he may be trying to talk you up, you know.
mhm.
You got to be really like mean to yourself almost, I think, and just be like, he did not want me, he didn't think I was good enough, like maybe he didn't think my boobs were big. Who knows, you know. Just be really specific and be really mean, as because I think if we heard all of these things from a man, we
Mhm.
would close the door. We would be like, he's so mean, he's so hurtful, you know. But no man says that, right?
Right.
Especially if they're trying to leave the door open to possibly come back into your life. So you got to say it to yourself.
What is the healthy amount that you should talk about your past? Because we all have a past. We all have our situationships, our relationships, but what is like, do you feel like there is such thing as TMI when it comes to how much you expose in a new relationship?
Yeah, 100%. I think you need to ask yourself why you're sharing stuff about your past. If you're sharing it because it's pertinent to the conversation and it comes up after you've been dating somebody for 3 to 6 months, then it's totally fine to share. It's almost weird not to, because it's like, what are you hiding? But I think a
Mhm.
lot of women get into this trap of like, I'm sharing what my ex did because I'm trying to see if you're going to do it too. So I'm like almost telling you like this is what he did and like hoping that you won't do the same thing if you hear it. And like men don't think like that. They're just like, oh, why are you bringing up your ex? You know?
Yeah.
So I think that's the important part is like, why are you bringing up your ex? If it's pertinent to the conversation and it's like salient to the topic at hand, then it's totally
Mhm.
appropriate to do so. And don't, you know, divulge everything all at once. But if you are bringing it up because you don't want your current partner to be the same way as your ex, then it's probably not appropriate to bring him or her up. You cannot expect your partner to fix the last guy. So I think there's that. It's like, don't make your current boyfriend pay for what your ex boyfriend did. But at the
Mm.
same time, he needs to be aware. And I think those conversations come up after the conversation has been had about like, this is somewhat of a long-term committed thing. We're really giving this a go, right? Like, don't hit him with it within the first month or two of dating.
No, not like the first date. Like I've had
Yeah.
dates like that. Like I went on a date with a guy
Oh my God.
already off to like just full stop there. That's
I know.
not no. But he was talking so much about his ex. This is the first date. Like I'm trying to just get to know you. I'm not trying to get to know you and all your baggage. Like, yeah, it's so true. It's like the appropriate time to talk about it is like when you already made the commitment.
Like bits and pieces come up over time. Like I never had like one big conversation with Dave about all of our exes. It just always came up in passing, like, oh, like, oh, why do you know this place? Like, you know why? Because I have all these like weird like habits and hobbies that I've picked up from men over the years that really are not my personality, but like for example, I have my scuba diving license, which is like random as fuck if you know me, because I can't even really, it's like I'm not athletic. I like can't really swim. And of course it was because I dated a guy who was like super into scuba diving. And I like, it came up one day with Dave. I was like, oh, I've actually gone scuba diving a ton. And he was like, why do you have that? Cause he like knew, you know, we've been dating for like 2 years. I was like, oh, well, my ex that I told you about that I live with, you know, he was really into it, blah, blah. So I got my license for him, which is a joke. It's like, you know, I don't know why I can't like do a breaststroke, but I have my scuba diving license to like sink down to like the bottom of the depths of the ocean floor. I'm like, that test is flawed. But you know, I think it comes up naturally over the course of time if it's the right relationship. And there were things that like he didn't even really learn until I started, because obviously like you and I probably think about our ex relationships more so than the average person because it's kind of what we do for work, you know?
Right.
And so there's a very detached way I think about these exes of mine now, but I do think about them in a more analytical way because I'm trying to make content out of it. And so there's stuff that I remember even coming up in my own videos now where like Dave was like, oh, I didn't know that. And not in a, oh, you didn't tell me. It was like, you know, some kind of traumatic stuff that I like hadn't really not talked about. One thing that came up, I made a video about it and it was like a kind of a sobering moment because I was like, I can't believe I didn't tell Dave about that. But I guess it was sort of one of those things where I was like, I just didn't really feel like it was applicable. I was 22 and I think he was like my third online date or something. He was a little bit older and we went out to dinner. He was like a perfect gentleman. And like, I did not know at the time, like you should probably not go back to a guy's place after the first date because you don't know him. And I went back to his place with him and he got like, you know, we were like making out. Everything was normal at first. And he started getting like really aggressive, like very, very aggressive. And then he had a 1-bedroom apartment, I remember. And he picked me up. I'm like, I'm fucking 5'2". Like you just throw me wherever you wanted. Right. And it's like, he picked me up and I remember like, I was like, I don't really like where this is going. Cause I didn't want to sleep with him. You know, I just kind of wanted to make out with him and like go home. Right.
Right.
And I realized I was like, this is not where this is going. And he picked me up and he threw me onto his bed and he slammed the door shut and he locked it. And I was like, there is nothing to do but to go through with it. And so I did. And nothing bad. I mean, look, it wasn't like a full on, like, you know, but it was, I don't know. It's taken me a long time to even figure out how I feel about, and I still don't know how I feel about that situation, but I never told my husband that because I left that night and I was just like, I think I consented to that. You know, I walked away and he walked me downstairs and he got me a cab. And it was just a very confusing situation. And I think a lot of women are in situations like that where like, I wasn't technically sexually assaulted or raped or anything, but whatever just happened was beyond my comfort zone.
Where it's like, like I was down for a cheeky makeout. How the hell did we end up here?
I know, but you know, you get to a point where you're like, I think if I said no, that would actually be more dangerous for me right now than to just kind of do what you want me to do so I can just leave once it's over. I think that's like, you know, and I always say it's like, you know, stand up for yourselves, ladies, but not in a situation like that where you're in physical danger. Like sometimes, honestly, just do what you have to do. That story came up like last year. And my husband's like, I never knew that. I was like, you know what? But like, I don't feel from that situation. I was like, I'm just never, I made a rule for myself. I was like, I'm not going home with a guy after the first, second, third, whatever date, you know? I was
Yeah.
like, I think 5 date rule I had. I wasn't like scarred by it. You know, it wasn't like so traumatic for me that I was like, I need people to know that this happened to me. It was just like, holy shit, like that was not great, you know?
Hmm.
And maybe there's a little bit of repressed shit there, but like I was like, this is so, you know, when he found that out, he was like, but you know, that's not something I'm going to bring up. Like even in the first few months, like, hey, I might have been assaulted on a first date at one point. I might have not, because like, what do they do with that information? You know, it's not his
Right.
thing, and like I'd worked past it.
I think there's, battles are things that you bring up and you like sort them on your own. And then if it's relevant to the relationship, like that probably wasn't relevant because he's a healthy, like,
Yeah.
your relationship is so healthy and thriving. So it's like, okay, that trauma isn't something that needs to live here,
Yeah, exactly. That's a
Right.
beautiful way of putting it. That trauma doesn't need to live in this space right here. It could come up
Right.
later. And it really only came up because I made a video about it, because I feel like in talking with my female friends that so many women have been in situations like that. These
So many.
inexplicable gray areas where it's like, it wasn't like I was gang raped. That was just not okay what happened to me. And
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
didn't, you know, that's why it's like, oh, like what does consent look like? Consent is an absolute fuck yes, or it's not consent, you know?
Right. Right. And I think like the lines always are getting blurred. And again, going back to like wanting to fit in a box or like just being there for the man, like kind of the theme of this whole episode. It's like, yeah, like we don't really vocalize like the hey, no, like fuck no, I don't want to do this. But it's like, oh shit, I'm already here. Like better go through with it or else. Like what's the other option?
Yeah,
I don't know what the other option is, so let's go with A.
exactly. Like
Yeah.
this is the easier, saying yes is the easier and the safer choice. So I'm going to do it. And it's sad,
Yeah.
but that's also anatomically just how it works. Like women are smaller than men on the whole, and it just like sucks, but that's the reality, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's definitely like moving away from that. Like you said, like different generations, like we're definitely stepping more into like, no, putting my foot down, like being more vocal, like those things are all okay. And like I think men are learning a lot more than in the past where it was like, you're my wife, like you're like, you know,
My
an extension of
possession,
me
yes,
and like we're
yeah.
not two wholes. You're like, we're a unit, like not in a good way. Thank you for sharing that story because I know you
Yeah,
have before, but like that's still like it's like such an icky like
it
feeling.
is. I think it's really important to talk about, because I feel like when people talk about understanding, and there are people who have been very much assaulted, rape, horrible, horrible things. And I think that there's a different space for that type of conversation versus what happened to me. I just remember leaving that situation and being like, ugh, that's awful. I'm glad I'm away from him. I got tested for STDs immediately the next day. Thankfully, didn't
So
have anything. And I was like, okay, cool. We're not, that was stupid, but like I'm alive and I don't have HIV. We're good. Yeah.
mm-mm. Okay, we're gonna lighten the mood a little bit. We're gonna play some Mad Libs. We're gonna jump into a game. Okay, so Mad Libs is I'm gonna give you a sentence or a phrase, and then you're going to fill in the blank. Okay, the biggest sign to never ignore is blank.
Your intuition. You know what's right and wrong. And when you second guess yourself, that usually means you're trying to make the wrong thing right. You
Mm-hmm.
never have to question if it's the right situation or the right person.
Yeah, going back to the convincing. If you have to convince other people and convince yourself, it's definitely 100% not it. The most cringe line a man has used on me during a breakup is blank.
Oh, let me think about this. I don't know if it's cringe, but I think it's pretty common. I had a guy break up with me and was like, but I don't want to date you exclusively, but I would like to keep dating you non exclusively while I date other people, if you
That
would be
same is
open
this
to
the
that.
same Chad we talked about earlier? Or is this another Chad?
It's another chat, actually, believe it or not.
Jesus. How many Chads have
Yeah.
you dealt with,
I mean,
girl?
look,
Like,
at least he was honest. I will say it was a moment of brutal honesty. I was like,
hmm,
damn, you really just, he wasn't even like, oh, I need to go find, some people will like not tell you that
I
they
hate
want to
that shit.
go
Like, be direct. That
find
is almost
themselves.
better.
Yeah.
Like, I would say he's a Brad. I think there's a Chad and there's a Brad. At least he's a douche, but he came with a little bit of
Honesty.
intention.
Yes, exactly. I was
Honesty,
like,
something.
and I said no. I was like, okay, well, at least, you know, you laid your intentions on the line so I could then walk away.
Like, I dated a Chad who was dating other people. Not, I was not in the loop, but he was like showing me something on his computer, and I saw Like we were like he had a system down to the T. It was my name, my age, and what app he saw me on. And then I saw like 5 other messages in his iMessages, like Anna, 28, Studio City, or like Abigail, 30, like whatever, Beverly Hills. And I was like, this man has a system. Like
You have too much time. Homeboy, if you're making spreadsheets for your dating life, you're not making enough spreadsheets for your career. You are.
terrifying.
Tell me you're broke without telling me you're broke.
Blank looks like a green flag, but is secretly a red flag in disguise.
Flattery. I think a lot of men will use compliments to disguise the fact that they actually have nothing better to say to you than to just compliment you on how you look and your personality. And if they're too like over the top and too like obsequious, I think that's a red flag. It's nice to be complimented every now and then, or, you know, but I think my best connections and my best relationships have always come from the men who you just are really, you know, they're not like constantly like, oh, you're so beautiful, or you're this, or you're that, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, they're taking the time to make very intentional comments and be engaged in a conversation.
Yeah, and it loses its power. Like if you're gonna tell me I look great like 50 times a day, it's like I'm gonna stop believing you. So you gotta like
those
pick and
guys who
choose
like
when you're
text
gonna
you
say
about like
it.
how hot you are, like whatever. It's like I'm not into that. It's
I'm so
too.
not. It's the raunchy texting too early. I don't know why that just like spiked a little memory. Like
Ooh,
I hate
such a
that.
red
Like
flag.
what
That's
is
not even
such
like
a
a
red
green flag.
flag?
That's the Red Sea.
Like I'm gonna go
Parting right
shower
there.
without me. It's like, sir. Oh, I like it's the when people are so sexually charged so early. That's one of my
Yeah.
like biggest red flags. It just completely shuts me down. That's a Chad. A Chad would do some shit like that.
100%.
When a guy starts talking about blank, run.
When a guy starts talking about how much money he makes, run. The men who love to just flash, like, this is like, you know, what I do. Like, I'm so important in my fucking, like, you know, when they're like blowhards, kind of, just run. He's no
Yeah.
one's like, truly the most important senior, like successful men do not talk about how successful they are.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they're just trying to get a break from work. Like if these guys who go all in their careers and everything, like they're on a date with you, not because they want to continue talking about their work, but because they want to break from it. Right.
Exactly.
They're not trying to like,
yeah.
So, yeah, don't date the guy who needs to talk about how successful he is, how much money he has, like what kind of car he drives, all that stuff.
You should be exhausted. You should want to talk about a million other things. Ask me questions, get to know me. If you're just sitting there talking about work, there's a huge issue.
It's
and
like
it's an
or the
insecurity.
guy like the type of guy who in New York City, like I remember being in my 20s dating the guy who had 2 roommates but wore a Rolex. And like, your priorities are not in the right place.
One lesson I learned that if they blank, they're not the one.
One lesson I learned is that if they judge your family and friends, they're not the one. Because I dated a man like that who was basically like, your friends aren't motivated enough, or like your friends aren't this or that, or like they're bad influences. And like, if he tries to separate you from your people, assuming you're not, you know, surrounded by toxic, because some people are like, oh, but what if my family is awful? I'm like, yeah, but you know your family's awful. Okay. So just you get away from them. All right. I'm saying if you have a loving, healthy relationship with your family and friends, and the guy you're dating is like, your family and friends suck, it's actually him that sucks.
Have you ever dated somebody that you said like someone hated your friends?
Yeah, he didn't like my friends. I remember he was like, he thought they were all like juvenile or whatever the fuck that meant. And I was like, well, I'm just as juvenile. And what ended up happening, oh, you know what it was? I dated him in my early 20s and he was like 8 years older than me. And I was in a very experimental phase in my life. And so my girlfriends were too. We were NYU girls. We did not just drink alcohol. We, you know, did lots of illegal substances. Don't do drugs, kids. But I definitely did. And, you know, here's the thing. Fentanyl was not a thing 10 years ago. So I was lucky in that sense. So I remember, was like, you shouldn't do that, which he wasn't wrong. Like, don't do drugs, kids. Like, I don't even drink anymore. That's the thing. It's like, I am now
Really?
sober,
Okay.
like sober. So it's like funny that this used to be my past life. But like, I always joke about, like, that is where I came from. And I remember thinking I was already starting to like do less of that. But like my girlfriends were dating guys that like still were very much into the party, like drugs thing. And he was like, they're such bad influence. But these were women that like had careers, this is what they chose to do in their free time. Nobody died from it. I'm not here to minimize drug. Do not do drugs. People listening, do not do drugs, because now
Do
it's
not
actually,
do drugs.
you could
Yes.
actually
No.
fucking die the first time, because it is
Ooh.
so much scarier now than it was back
Yeah.
then. I'm sorry. Like drugs were like better 10 years ago. They were, and now they're not.
Everything was
And so just
better like back in the
everything
day.
was better. But he was like, they're like horrible people for going to an EDM concert, and like doing substances. And I was like, I'm pretty sure they're like just having fun. And so I was doing less of them. But then when I wanted to go out with my friends, I ended up like hiding it from him because I knew he wouldn't approve. And like, that's just like such a red flag. So it doesn't matter how good you are together. If he can't really fit into your life, he's just not the one.
Yeah, I think like exactly that. Like if you cannot find like any type of like redeeming qualities about their friend groups or their family, it's definitely a red flag. Gotta be on board or get the fuck off the plane.
Yes.
Okay. The last one. The best advice I can give when it comes to dating is blank.
The best advice I can give to dating is to take your time. We are always taught that we're running out of time, especially as women. And the thing is, it's like you think about the average life expectancy now. If we're lucky, we all get to live to be like 90. Oh my God, you're single at 35. You ain't dead. You're not even halfway through. Like, it's like, calm down. You have time. And the less time you think you have, the more you'll end up wasting time. It's a very like, life is very paradoxical like that. I think like women get into these relationships and they stay for longer than they should because they feel like they're running out of time and they got to make the current situation work, and they end up wasting more time.
Yeah, you think that you're so rushed. Like, especially in your 20s, there's like this weird, like, I have to figure it out. I have to figure it out. Like, we're dead at 30, basically, when it's such a small blip on like the grand scheme of your life. It's like, take the time, figure out what you like, make the mistakes, be okay with making the mistakes, and you will figure it out.
I have so much. Yes, I needed those lessons, but also I've never felt like I've had more time at 33 than I felt like at 23. I was running out of time. I'm like, it's just getting started. And I've heard from like women I know in their 40s, they're like, your 40s are better than your 30s.
Everyone says that. I'm like, we're
Yeah.
ready. I'm waiting, and I'm
We are so ready. But like so many
excited.
men want you to believe that your life is over because that's how they control you.
In your 30s, like life really truly does get better. And it's like, it's almost like you're just learning who you are more. Like you said something earlier, it was like your, what was it? It was like the mistakes that you make, like becoming who you are. Like you have to do that.
You have to become who you're not sometimes in order to discover who you truly are. I think
need that on a fucking t-shirt. That is so good because it really is so true. Like you have to go through those really bad, ugly versions of yourself in order to get to the person who you are.
And
Yeah.
I think about all the different personalities I've like tried on in the dressing room, right?
She's
Like,
a scuba diver. You scuba dived.
dude, I scuba dive, I skied, I did so many athletics that I like shit had no business doing because I was like, I'm gonna be the cool girl that like fucking scuba dives and skis with her board. No, I'm fucking not
I mean,
into
and being
any
a
of that.
cool girl is exhausting.
Don't like if you don't want to be the life of the party, don't be the life of the party. You can still have fun at the party. Women are taught like, oh, we need to always have the attention on us in a group in a room. Like if not everyone's staring at you, like who, you're not the it girl. I'm like, don't be the it girl because it's too exhausting having all eyes on you. You don't get to enjoy the moment. Like sometimes you got to take a step back, and just really, really just enjoy where you are instead of trying to make everybody else help you enjoy the moment.
Are there any other like major tips that you would give to the girls dating in their 20s?
Do everything, do everyone. No, I'm joking. Don't do that.
Do everything, do everyone.
I think to actually, I mean, I was joking, but not really, is to actually try everything that you're curious about within, healthy, normal parameters. Don't do drugs, obviously. Don't do drugs, but I don't regret a single thing that I did in my 20s that I failed in. And I don't regret anything about my 20s because I did everything I wanted to do. And I did that knowing I always like approached my 20s thinking, you know what, I'm really scared to do this one thing. And I'm still living my life that way now. I'm doing a lot of things now that scare me that I don't know if they'll work out. But I'm like, I will regret this in 50 years. that I didn't do it versus if I did it and I failed.
Yeah, it just builds your character. Like you have to make those mistakes in order to really become the whole version of yourself. It's a
Right.
part of
And
like
that's,
unlocking the new character, you know, the different levels, the different eras. You got to go through them all to really get to the other side of like, this is who I am. And like the self love journey, you know, like you have to, through those dark times, you really do learn how to like love yourself more too.
well, and if you're lucky, I always think that you will look at the previous year of your life and think you were stupid if you're lucky, because that means you're growing every year. If you look at
Mhm.
yourself from 10 years ago and think you were really smart, like that means you just haven't really grown.
That was me then. Like, thank God I'm right here, right now. Exactly.
Exactly.
Exactly. Okay, well, Anna Kai, thank you so much for hanging out at After Curfew virtually,
Thank
my
you
first
so
virtual
much.
interview.
Thank you for having me.